Welcome back to Kings of Columbus on the podcast. Doug Lamreese and Bill Landis, 38-15. You guys watch it? You think the people watch it? Can you imagine? Hey, I wonder what happened in the game. I'll tune into Kings of Columbus to find out what the score was. Number 2 Buckeyes take care of the number 5 Indiana Hoosiers. We are here to react and respond with the dedicated, educated, loyal Ohio State fans of our tech subscription service. Landis was up through the night going through the responses on the text, and we will let those answers guide us through what was a very, again, I think I've used this word like professional a lot of times this year. It's just like, it's not necessarily, bunch of deep shots and what, it's just like playing good ball, man. And then the special teams pick me up from Ohio State was huge this game, but like just a really, really good win by Ohio State. Do you agree with that?
I do agree with that. Yeah. I think this team's really good at not like flinching when, in the early part of a game, teams can come in with a really good script, or teams are just like super amped up and they take a pretty nice swing at Ohio State on its opening drive or in the first quarter. And even at the end of the first quarter, you're sort of like kind of pulling your hair out or throwing your hands up thinking like, what's up with this team? And then they're just kind of steady. Like I have a tremendous amount of confidence, and I actually think Ryan Day does too, in like this team just weathering that. And I think like, I don't know if that is the experiences of just going through a season where you have 3 games like this, or the fact that Ohio State is just old in general, no matter what this season has looked like. And Ryan Day, I guess, has not said that explicitly, but I do feel like I've picked up on that from him, that he just thinks this team has a decent amount of resolve. And if a team can show resolve in a game that it ends up winning 38-15, I thought Ohio State did show some.
Yeah. No, I and again, like that, it doesn't mean Indiana stinks. I imagine we got some responses like that, but it just is not. It doesn't mean that Indiana isn't what it had been or isn't what it will be. The efficiency of the Indiana offense after the first drive was just completely undone by the pressure from the Ohio State defense, the blitzes from the Ohio State defense, the crowd noise that threw off Indiana and forced them to a silent count. Like this was, again, I just think like a great defensive effort from Jim Knowles calling it to all of these guys, I think led by Cody Simon, just executing it at a really high level. And a lot of the back shoulder throw stuff that we had talked about during the course of the week just like never really got there. And at the end of the game, I was like, hey, Landis, you're a ball knower. How come there weren't any back shoulder throws? And you were like, because they didn't have any time to throw them. And I was like, sorry, I don't know. I didn't know the answer to that, but that was it, right? There was too much pressure. Curtis Work couldn't stand back there and do the thing he usually does.
That is correct. I wanted to look up something and I forgot to do it. Now I'm going to try to do it on the fly. I want to know Curtis Work. Like at one point I looked up and it was like the third quarter, and Curtis Work had only thrown like 14 passes or something like that. Like it was
really.
I just think Ohio State really took them out of their game. So he ended up throwing 18 passes for the game. He was 8 of 18 and he got sacked 5 times. So it's like completions and sacks were almost even, right? So there was nothing there. There was nothing there for Indiana's offense, because they're not a team that I think is going to win, but because I think Ohio State can do this. It's like, boy, this is a really good pass defense. It's taking us out of our stuff. We'll just run the ball, or vice versa. I don't think Indiana is built to do that. It has a nice running game, but it is a complement very much so to its passing game, and they want to throw the ball. So that's why I'm not even there. I didn't pull any of the questions, but there were some about like, are you concerned at all about what Indiana was able to get on the ground, which ended up being 83 yards when you account for sacks. It was obviously a little better than that if you take the sacks out of the equation, and Tyson Lawton and Justice Ellison, they had nice games. I'm not concerned about that because Ohio State took away the thing it had to take away, right? And like it's like you can you can extrapolate that toward Michigan if you want to, but it's a totally different script against Michigan. Michigan will want to play the game in a phone booth and run the ball, and Ohio State's defensive plan will be to stop that. It won't be to stop the Indiana pass game like it was on Saturday, which did allow some room for Indiana to run the ball, but never really in a way that I thought was all that threatening. It's just like they had to counter what Ohio State was taking away, which was just smothering their passing attack.
Yeah, Kurt Cignetti, the Indiana coach, after the game was sort of saying like we stopped calling passes because we couldn't protect the quarterback. So it was like, well, we can't do this part of our game.
Said,
and that is a great credit.
He said every time we dropped back to pass, something bad happened.
Yeah, Woody Hayes.
I don't know if he was channeling. Was he channeling Woody? I don't know, but yeah,
and he was talking about. He said it twice. That it felt like, I guess, the end zone in front of the student section. He said it felt like we were in that end zone all day, like for a quarter and a half.
Yeah, the south end.
Because that was the end zone where that was the third quarter end zone, right? That was the end zone where their punter dropped it, and then it was the end zone that they were in when Caleb Downs returned it, and it was also the end zone where they had to make the goal line stand, right? But like it was Ohio State was just like bludgeoning them in that corner of the field all day, and it made Kurt Cignetti sad on the inside. So where the texters taking us, Landis? What are there, like, are people, and again, just as a reminder to everybody, if anybody's in like I don't know, like told you so, I knew mode or whatever, when I sent the survey before the game, when the line was 13.5 in midweek, it was like split down the middle of will Ohio State cover or not cover. So there certainly was half the fan base that was like, I very possibly think this could be a competitive game. You and I were certainly there. And after the first drive, after the first quarter, it seemed like, okay, this is what this is. Here we are. And then it was like, no, that's not actually where we are. So what are the people thinking?
I guess maybe since you mentioned that, I will read this because it doesn't really fit into any one category, but I thought it was, I guess like a fair point for anybody who wants to kind of check us on what we say about games going into them. It's from Aiden. He said, I know you guys are going to say that special teams caused this to be a blowout. It wasn't that. At no position does Indiana have a better player than Ohio State. Jeremiah Smith and Downs. I kind of written weird. Sorry. Saying this game would be close and not a blowout after seeing what Michigan's defense did to Indiana was wrong, and I think you guys knew it. The Buckeyes could have put up 50 today if they played decent in the red zone, which is true. They finished with 38 points. They were 4 or 6 in the red zone, so there were 2 other touchdowns there that they could have gotten. I'll just say that the game played out exactly how I thought it would. I picked 28-17, and I also think I specifically said that Indiana would score late to make it 28-17, and it was 31-15 with a minute left, and Ohio State scored that touchdown, which I had no problem with. So I don't know. I don't think it was special teams that changed the game. I think it was Ohio State being demonstrably more talented than Indiana that changed the game. I just kind of feel like I have a feel for how Ohio State plays, which is slow and not particularly high scoring. So that's why I didn't pick a big number for Ohio State. But I don't know that I was surprised by anything that I saw on Saturday, because after watching the Michigan game, felt like Ohio State's defense would probably do something similar to Indiana's offense.
Yeah, I thought Indiana would be able to be more efficient and more consistent for a longer chunk of the game than one drive, right? And I just like we have better players argument, like, of course, is true, but it's not the end of the argument to me. Not in this era of transfers and sort of building new teams right away. And Ohio State has a bunch of better players than Nebraska too, and that was a 4-point game, right? So I'm just out of that business. If you want to be in the business of this team has more good players, that's my full analysis, that's it, game over, then that's fine. But I don't think that's where the sport is right now. And if you want to go down that path, then maybe you should just go follow the SEC, because that's the extent of their argument a lot of the time.
But I don't think
that's the end all be all. But when Ohio State has the better players, which they do, and then is like completely locked in on both sides of the ball, then it's like, okay. And Ohio State had been trending toward that. to being like the way they had played since the Oregon game. I think we both believed like that's the team they are right now. But I still leave, it's like, okay, well, if Indiana comes in and Ohio State feels pressure and Will Howard throws a goofy early ball like he did against Penn State and they can't get the run game going like against Nebraska, or if Sarabelt and Hinsman is an issue, which we didn't think it would be, and it wasn't, and I'm sure there are questions about that. I just don't think like Ohio State has a lot more good players means blowout necessarily. So like,
yeah, I don't think it means blowout.
They control the game.
Yeah. I don't think it automatically means blowout. I think I don't disagree with how many of those guys would start for the other team is a terrible shorthand for trying to assess the talent on hand, right? So it's like we were talking about it in the press box. If somebody else sent in a question earlier in the week, like how many guys in Indiana would start for Ohio State, and I think the answer is probably none, because Ohio State's pretty solid at every position. I think there are players in Indiana who are good enough to play at Ohio State, which is not always the case when Ohio State plays Big Ten teams. But like, come on this roster and bench a current starter and play in place of them, probably not anybody. Maybe Carter Smith, the tackle, but that's about as close as you can get.
Yeah,
it's a maybe, right? So I think it's a fair point to bring up, but I don't know. There wasn't a lot of it. There was a little bit of it. Like, I don't understand maybe it's just like people get annoyed by us acknowledging the fact that other teams might also be good, while also, I think, being pretty fair to how good we believe Ohio State is.
While picking Ohio State to win the national championship.
Ohio State to win the national championship. That like Indiana stinks. Indiana's a fraud. You guys talk this team up too much. It's like Ohio State. I think Indiana's good, and I thought Ohio State blew their doors off. Like, can both things be true? Can I give Ohio State credit for what I think is a really good win, or we just?
But can I also say this? I mean, because so like the who has the better player conversation, and Ohio State was completely shutting them down on offense. I'll push back and say Indiana went up 7-0. Ohio State marched down the field and got stopped on a goal line stand because they wound up in a situation where they tried to have Will Kazmarek block Mikhail Kamara on a really important play, and that didn't work. And so they got stopped on a goal line stand, and then they tied it, and then they forced a turnover, and then they gave it right back on a turnover because there was a play where they gave up interior pressure. Sarabelt and Hinsman did give up interior pressure on that play, and they threw the ball to Jelani Thurman, and D'Angelo Pons, who's a really good corner, drove on the ball, and that led to an interception. So we're trading turnovers there. And so it was 7-7 with a minute 41 left in the first half, and the punter dropped the ball. So, and you can say that like it felt like Ohio State was going to, like, the offense was getting ready to take over there. It's also, I mean, it's certainly possible that they punt that ball away and they get a stop on third down and it goes to half 7-7. And as Curt Cignetti said, like, that wasn't going to change the game in the second half. Cignetti said he felt fortunate to be down only 14-7 coming out of the second half. And he thought to himself, we're lucky we're not getting rolled. Maybe we got settled down in the second half and we can come out and do something now. And then it was like, no, you still can't run offense because this Ohio State defense is destroying you. But if the Indiana punter doesn't drop the ball, it might be tied at halftime. And so then you can line up the Ohio State has better players. It could have been tied at halftime if Indiana didn't make a devastating mistake that we've seen teams make against Ohio State. You can't come in and do that stuff. And I thought Indiana wouldn't do that stuff. But also, if you have 105 guys on the roster and one punter drops the ball. Now, you thought maybe they got in his head a little bit and were coming after him, that influenced him to drop the ball. He also dropped the ball. It wasn't even a bad, he just dropped it. How often do you see a punter just drop the ball? So I think it was that close to being 7-7 at halftime. And then I think the game unfolds from there. But like now it sounds like I'm getting a little mad. It's like the idea of like, oh, they have better players, just whatever. They're a drop punt away from being tied at halftime. So I think Ohio State is tough. I think they're confident. I think their defense is incredibly locked in. But I thought the Indiana defense was like holding up enough, and there were enough matchups there. Like I thought like the thing in the red zone of, It can be about, yes, Ohio State has, like, there's not many guys who would start for Indiana, but sometimes it's just about matchups. And Ohio State tried to win a matchup with Patrick Gurd and Will Kazmarek blocking two guys on the edge, and they put that play on those two guys against an all Big Ten defensive end. And it's like, well, you're going to lose that matchup, and you lost the matchup right there, and it cost you. So like, stop making that matchup what important plays are about. But I think it's a credit to Ohio State to say that like Indiana came out and like competed. I thought they did compete, and then they got overwhelmed, which is sort of what you were saying is what you sort of thought it would be, which is what we see all the time with Ohio State. Good team, well-coached team. They come in, they compete for a little while, and then Ohio State overwhelms them. And that's what happened. But it wasn't 54-0 from the jump. So that's all.
Right. I do think it's funny. In a game of two top 5 Big Ten teams, a pivotal moment inside the 5-yard line comes down to a walk-on, a MAC transfer, and a transfer from James Madison. And who's going to win the battle?
But that's where the sport is too. So to pretend that it's just like Ohio State's 5-star against Indiana's 2-star, and that's what the game's about, not all the time. That's not what it's about all the time. And then, by the way, what's the Ohio State turnover? It's like a really good corner. He's Old Dominion, right? Pons is Old Dominion, or is he JMU too? He's JMU too. A really good corner drives on a young tight end, right? And it's like, should Jelani Thurman have caught it? You think so? I thought it was a little bit more like Pons got his arm in there. Pons might be like second team All Big Ten. Is that like where he's probably going to make something?
Yeah.
And he's 5'9", and you said if he was 2 inches taller, he might have been at a
first
Big Ten school before this year, right? So anyway, like, what's that matchup? Well, who's better in that matchup? D'Angelo Pons is a better football player right now than Jelani Thurman, and that matchup created a turnover. So like, that's the thing too. So when the matchup is Ohio State's putting it on Emeka Egbuka, and Ohio State's putting it on Sonny Styles, and Ohio State's putting on Caleb Downs, Indiana does not have somebody who can win those matchups against those guys. But those aren't the only matchups in the game. So, and now I'm mad. I'm mad because I thought it was competitive for a half. And I don't think to like spin it as like Ohio State kicked their butt the whole time is what happened. And I think it takes away. I think it takes away from Ohio State to like act like their opponent is terrible, because like Indiana beats a lot of people. Indiana would beat a lot of people.
I agree with that. I do think. I mean, Ohio State absolutely dominated on defense. There was nothing Indiana could do after that first drive, and like, while Indiana's defense like put up a heck of a fight, like clearly it wasn't capable of contending with everything that Ohio State has to deal with. So like, I thought this was a pretty thorough, convincing win for Ohio State. And I'm fine with anybody.
7-7 with 7-7, 25 minutes into the game.
But Ohio, that's. I mean, there's 4 quarters, right? A game is 4 quarters. A game isn't a half, right? So I am fine with. I'm really fine with anything. I don't actually care. I would want Ohio State fans to enjoy this for the good win that I think it, like the really good win that I think it is, and like not have the immediate reaction to be like, oh, that team was fraudulent the entire time.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like I just feel bad for any and we're spending a lot of time on this. Honestly, there wasn't a whole lot of that. So we're probably giving it too much time, more time than it deserves. But there was some of it, and I don't know. I guess maybe I wanted us to say our piece on that before we dive into some other stuff. Because there was the prevailing thought, I think, relative to that conversation was like, this was a good win. This was
definitely a good win. Definitely, like, really. And here's the thing too. It's like, if Ohio State brings its A game, no chance, right? But you have to bring your A game. And the offense brought its A game, the defense brought its A game, the special teams brought its A game, and the crowd brought its A game. And people know that I have often over the years been on like, I don't think Ohio Stadium is that much of a home field advantage compared to a lot of other places. And then I've always said, especially when the Ohio State gets down early, I think the crowd can get on edge and get a little bit like not, hey, let's rally the troops, more like, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening. And that is not at all how it unfolded. The crowd helped Ohio State win. And that really matters. And I think that's nice. I was at the Notre Dame game 2 weeks ago, and I thought there was a great connection between the Notre Dame crowd and the Notre Dame team that really mattered. And it was like, man, this is what college football should be. And that is exactly what it was in Ohio Stadium on Saturday. It's been a tough couple years for Ohio State, but in a top 5 matchup the week before the Michigan game, that was right. We've been at like Woody against the world, right?
Yeah.
Like this program and this fan base has been like, hey, we don't even need the fans right now. We're not on the same page. And that was 1,000%. Like the fact that now Michigan is coming into that, and that's where this entire thing is, fan base and program in a year where they lost, right? People weren't exactly thrilled after the Oregon loss. Like that's where everything is. That is unbelievably awesome for everybody watching and listening to this. Like that's your program right now. That's your program. You're locked in. Great place to be.
All right, let's run through
one more thing to say about that. I
think Jeff with that. Yeah. Okay, here's a couple. I'm just gonna rattle them off. Some of them are a little longer. This is from Steven Steen, our guy. This is what a team starting to peak looks like. I don't think he said they're peaking. They're not. They're starting. They've begun the process of peaking, which is probably where you want to be as you enter the last week of the regular season. I said need to clean up the slow starts a little bit. The O-line has to gel a little bit more. But dang, do they outperform yet another reshuffle up front. Michigan and Oregon will be tougher. Michigan in a rematch with Oregon will be tougher challenges then into the playoffs. Nothing about that has changed. But a national title is so close you can taste it. If what I've seen continues. Ben said the score doesn't tell the story of how resilient this team was. Indiana came out punching, and the Buckeyes didn't flinch. James says this team is really good. People need to stop doubting it. I don't think Indiana is bad. I think they're good, and they got beat by a really good team. Eric says statement win, and then he ran through a couple of different areas. Defense came out rocky, but really stepped up. Offense said he was happy with the play calling. The offensive line held up fine. I think I agree with that. Special teams continues to make a difference. Happy with how the team played. And then he said it's Michigan week. I actually, that was punctuated there with it's Michigan week. This is what the seniors came back for. I didn't grab a ton of Michigan stuff, and there was some of it. A lot of it was just like F Michigan, which we're here for. But we're gonna dive pretty deep into Ohio State, Michigan later on in the week. So there's not a whole lot of Michigan in these comments, but I think like those four or so kind of assessments of what happened. That was very much, I think, the prevailing thought that like Ohio State was challenged, I think, on the field with some of the things that Indiana was doing, and I think off the field with some of the things that had been said like in the build up to that game. Then I'm not even talking necessarily about like Kurt Cignetti, saying the things that he says, but a not insignificant number of people picked Indiana to win the game, including Desmond Howard. So I think that there are a lot of folks pretty happy, and Pat McAfee. There are a lot of folks pretty happy with how Ohio State kind of responded to a real challenge there.
Yeah. Did you see like Brian Hartline was mad on Twitter about people picking Indiana? That he said he thought this went like just as they thought it would go, which again is like one of those of like in terms of like the talent that Ohio State has faced in their 3 top 5 games. I mean, there's no doubt about that. Like it's Indiana 3rd, Penn State 2nd, and Oregon 1st. Right. So like that is, there's no doubt about that. But like the idea that this is a team like getting ready to peak, and like Will Howard said, right? Didn't Will Howard say after the game, I don't think you've seen the best of us. Like this is not.
Yeah, he did say that. Yeah.
And I like this. Maybe there are questions about this, but to think about where the running back situation, for instance, as much as they have offensive line injuries, but to think about where the running back situation is right now, for instance, compared to a couple years ago, 2 years ago, when Ohio State was getting ready to play a linebacker at running back in the Michigan game, like that part of it, that there's just pieces lined up. I still like Jeremiah Smith was not a huge part of the game plan on Saturday. I thought there were some one-on-one matchups that kind of were sitting there that maybe they could have gone to more and they didn't. You were all over big game mech. That happened. But like that, there, like especially offensively, right? Special teams, that was about as good as it gets for Ohio State. That's as good as we've ever seen.
Yeah.
Is that as good as you've seen of a special teams game for Ohio State since you joined the beat in 2014?
Yeah, well, but I can probably count the special team splash plays that Ohio State has made over that time.
Yeah,
and there were 2 of them in this game. So yeah, that's about as good as it gets.
So special teams is like it is peaking, right? It peaked, and they want to continue that peak, make the peak a plateau. The defense, Again, we're talking about it during the whole game. It's just, this is the full Knowles. We are in full Knowles territory. And what happened in year one with Tommy Eichenberg and how we felt like Jim Knowles and Tommy Eichenberg were sharing a brain, and he was bringing the best out of this guy that previously had not looked like that kind of player. I thought Saturday looked like that's the area that Cody Simon was in, and Cody Simon's more naturally athletic than Tommy Eichenberg. And also it looks like we're in a Knowles Simon mind meld now. And it's like, okay. And Sonny Styles, considering where we were in the first 40% of the season with the Sonny Styles know how to play linebacker. There were a couple times where, what was it? Did they run a stretch play? Like maybe a stretch play worked and then they ran another one and Sonny Styles was just waiting in the hole. And it was like, that is how you do it.
Yeah, they kept running that, like, yeah, I guess it was stretch, or maybe it was like a mid zone kind of run that was like working pretty well. And then it was just like Jim Knowles pressed the Sonny Styles button, and then that was the end of that.
Yeah. So like that, it's like, okay, I think the defense is right. That is the one of the two most efficient offenses in the country. And after the first drive, it was non-existent. That's because of the Ohio State defense. So those two are like, okay, we are seeing it. And the offense, we're not. There, and that's not a criticism of the offense. There's more there.
Yeah.
Isn't there more there?
There is more there, but I think it's understandable that we haven't seen it when you use two offensive line starters, right? Like, there are reasons for it not always looking 100% efficient, or to use Will Howard's words, why it hasn't looked like Ohio State has quite played its best game on offense yet. And it's just it hasn't had much of an opportunity, I think, to like build that rhythm. It did, like, honestly, not even early in the year, because Donovan Jackson missed the first two games. Then he comes back, and you get the build through the Oregon game, and then that's when you lose Josh Simmons. Then you have the whole mess at left tackle against Nebraska. Then you have like 2 games of stability, and then you lose Seth McLaughlin. Like that's a lot to kind of work your way around. So, and it's not like the offense has been bad during that stretch. It's still been pretty good. It's just like maybe it's not it's not quite as efficient as the defense. And I can't believe I'm saying it, special teams have been over the last couple of weeks, but there's certainly more there. I thought Steven made a good point in his assessment, saying like the offense needs some time to gel. And I agree with that. It's hard. Like, it's not like they're going to have a couple of let up games where they can figure out how to do that. They got to go block Michigan's front next week. And then if they win that game, go block Oregon's again. So you have to gel on the fly against a pretty good competition. But even with all that, I still think, like, you have to love the form that Will Howard is in right now with the way he's throwing the ball. I think you have to love the form that Travion Henderson is in, and some people do. We get a question about that. So it's like you can see it. You're just waiting for it to all come together, and I think it will. But in the meantime, you have the defense and the special teams picking up whatever slack needs to be picked up.
And they're like after the down touchdown, like the next drive for Ohio State, when they drove for the touchdown, they started with the big Emeka throw, right? And then there are times it's like, oh, okay, yeah. Remember how they can do that kind of when they want to? That is sitting there, and then it's like you start doing the thing again of like, well, who's going to bring that out of them? When are they going to need that? But if they get in a game where Oregon's chucking the ball down the field on them again, and it's like, all right, pedal down. Like, this is going to be a game in the 40s even now. They can do that. They can do that. Or if it's like grinded out a little bit and the offense is starting slow and it's like the defense needs to stand up until the offense figures it out a little bit, they can do that. And now Oregon won that game on special teams. And it's like, well, the one thing I would say coming out of Oregon, Ohio State, the most definitive thing I would say is that Oregon's better at special teams than Ohio State. Because Oregon won the Boise State game on a kick return and a punt return. They stole a possession in the Ohio State game on special teams. No doubt about it. That's where Oregon's greatest edge is. Would you still say that?
I'd be more open-minded about it being even.
Closing the gap.
Yeah.
Like, Oregon is excellent at that. And like, what is Ohio State doing? Like, they started doing Oregon stuff. Caleb Downs returning a punt for a touchdown is the equivalent of Tez Johnson returning a punt for a touchdown. And you watch that game and it's like, boy, Oregon's most explosive guy is really important to them on special teams. I wonder what would happen if Ohio State did that. And it was like, this would happen. It's like, good job. Yeah. Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. Thanks for the idea, Dan. Let's try that.
Yeah.
So like that is, I thought the next punt, Indiana punted the next one and it was short again. And Caleb Downs was maybe coming up. Like, am I going to try to take this off a bounce or two again? And I thought there was like an Indiana guy like sprinting to down the ball because he was like, do not let Caleb Downs pick this up and try to run with this thing. And it's like, that's where you are. We are at sprint to down the ball territory before Caleb Downs can get his mitts on that thing. We haven't been there in a long time, Landis.
We have not. Let's talk more about the punt return. We got more than a few texts about that. Sullivan said, I don't know if I've ever been happier than I was when I was watching that punt return. And I think actually, I think it's just a fan. I don't know about in life in general, but I won't make assumptions there either.
I actually think that makes me think that Ryan Day subscribes to the text because that's exactly what Ryan Day looked like. It was the happiest moment of his life.
Yeah. From Dalton said, what a game. I think during Caleb Downs' return was the loudest I've been while watching a game. It was a great win. Indiana is good, but the Bucks were better today. And then Matthew said, being in Ohio Stadium today was one of the greatest experiences I can remember. I have no voice left. And it was cool to hear Coach Cignetti crediting the crowd noise. The Caleb Downs touchdown could be my all-time favorite Buckeye moment.
That gives you chills a little bit, man. Like this is where, how fantastic is it that this is where fans are right now? Like it's been a long road back and it's not back until Ohio State beats Michigan in the shoe, right? That's when it'll be back. Right. So if Ohio State does that on Saturday, then I think we're back to, it's like it's like the Ohio State program was like in a time warp, right? Mm-hmm. So you can't get ahead of yourself until then. But if that happens next Saturday, then it's all back. And now it's just, okay, now let's go see if Ohio State can prove it's the best team in the country, which is where Ohio State was after dropping 56 on Michigan State in 2021. And then there was a 3-year detour. Yeah. But that this is real. Like this is why you're a sports fan. And to like be in there with your family and your friends and your community and celebrating that. And like, there's nothing more that those players and coaches want to do than give that to those fans. So that makes me excited for Caleb Downs. It's like, yeah, because I was like trying to explain this like to my daughter or something the other day. Again, like Caleb Downs is such a defining player in all of this, because I do think the single low point of the Ryan Day era and maybe of this modern era of Ohio State football was signing day after Michigan beat Ohio State in Ohio Stadium in 2022 to show that like, okay, it wasn't a 1-year blip. And now they came into Ohio State's house and did that. And then here came signing day and Ohio State did not get Caleb Downs. And that to me was the example of like, okay, NIL is not working the way it needs to work for Ohio State. There was a lot of frustration about like previously they maybe would have gotten that guy that they thought he wanted to be here and it didn't happen. And Ryan Day leaving the Woody that day, I think the combination of the Michigan loss and that reality was the low point, because it's not just the present is a problem. Is the future going to be a problem? And then they went and played Georgia and started to get it back a little bit, right? The greatest loss in Ohio State history. Like that did uplift people. So that's why that was the start of the road back. And listen, the Michigan detour is like another bump on that, right? But they were much more competitive last year against Michigan than they were at home the year before. And then all this Connor Stallion stuff, we get it. But that's the low point. And this, again, to me, it's like what goes around comes around. That Urban Meyer started the low point for the Big Ten in Ohio State by winning the 2006 national championship game at Florida, and then brought it back by beating Alabama and winning the national championship in 2014. That was an 8-year cycle. We're on a 2-year cycle now, but Caleb Downs is in the Urban Meyer seat. Him not coming to Ohio State was the low point, and him returning that punt was the high point since then. That was the greatest moment since Trayvon Henderson got stopped on 3rd and 1 in Ann Arbor in 2021, right? Like that is like that. This is, it's so, Landis, get your notes out, write your book, man. Let's go.
This is the lead. Podcast.
This is the lead. But like, is it like, that it's that guy. And it's like, oh, that's why Ryan Day was really sad about not getting Caleb Downs on signing day, because that guy can do that thing. And now he's here. Holy moly.
I don't know. I agree with you. I don't think we're making too much of what that moment was. And we'll see what comes of it, right? Like, it's not like, I think it needs to be a spark for something. It really felt like it was, because it wasn't just that the play happened and Ohio State snapped the streak of not having a punt return for a decade, and that you got to see Caleb Downs like make a spectacular play in Ohio Stadium. For me, it's also like the emphasis that was put into it to make it happen, like paying off, that I think will really pay dividends for Ohio State moving forward. And I said this on the KOTN show on Saturday night, but I'll repeat it for anybody who wasn't watching that. Go, if you haven't already, rewatched the punt a bunch of times, but you probably have, because it's a super cool play. Like, watch Denzel Burke on that play. Watch CJ Hicks on that play. And even a little bit like Lorenzo Styles, he's the jammer on the other side. He doesn't quite do it quite as well as Denzel Burke, but like Denzel Burke's effort on the gunner on it's on the bottom of the screen if you're watching the television broadcast. Just like he doesn't stop. He's just like on him the whole way, just fighting like heck to make sure that guy doesn't get to Caleb Downs, and he doesn't. And then Caleb Downs is able to scoop it up and get down the sideline, and then CJ Hicks throws an incredible block down the field to help Caleb Downs get the cutback lane that he used to get the touchdown. Like, it's and Ohio State has spent just a ton of time on that, like putting those guys in those positions first of all, and then putting more thought into how to weaponize their special teams on top of that. And it just all came to fruition there in a pretty pivotal moment, and one of the better moments, I guess I would say, like, definitely in Ohio Stadium in my time covering the team. Like, I would really put it up there. I don't think it supersedes like Curtis Samuel running into the end zone against Michigan in double overtime, but it's pretty high up there about things that I've seen happen in Ohio Stadium.
Oh, can we do that now? I love when you introduce new podcast topics in the middle of the podcast. I guess we'll say that for the off season, but the single greatest moments in Ohio Stadium for fans who have been there, like that Samuel with the arms outstretched. So I call this piece a season in a punt. So this is what we're talking about here. We just did the Caleb Downs thing, the Denzel Burke thing. Denzel Burke, the guy who stands out the most of like why they lost the Oregon game, this up and down career where he's been great, where he's had highs, where he's had lows. It was a huge part of the discussion. What happens? They put him on special teams, and his effort on special teams as a guy who came back to be a first-round corner in the NFL draft, right? His effort on special teams is key. CJ Hicks, a guy who has never been in the right position at Ohio State, who's a 5-star recruit who is still looking for his comfort zone, is still looking for his role. And I heard he said this on a show somewhere, is like clearly very frustrated about this, right? Huge effort on special teams really matters. And again, I was watching Ryan Day, the two guys who celebrated with Ryan Day the most. That's a head coach who has been down, who has been scarred, who has been burnt, who is the two most times I've seen, the most excited I've seen Ryan Day in his career is when CJ Stroud against Georgia out of the pocket, shook off the sack, through the touchdown pass, and that punt return. The two guys who celebrated with him, Brandon Inniss, who is a guy on his way up, who has been waiting his turn, who does everything right, who does not get many opportunities on offense, knows his time is coming, but is locked in with this team. Young guy on the way up. And the other guy was JT Tuimoloau, who's been here forever, has not achieved individually or as a team what he wanted to do as a 5-star recruit, and was locked in and celebrating his coach about a special teams play. That is this team. Young and old, offense and defense, head coach celebrating together a special teams play. And if you would have said 2 years ago, Landis, that was going to happen, I don't think we would have believed it. That's not where this program was with special teams. And they got there by necessity. They got there because they realized they had to emphasize that and lean on their best players in those moments to have a chance to win it all. Because just chucking around on offense, maybe making some good plays on defense was not going to be enough. Man, a season and a punt by Bill Landis. 3,500 words by Monday morning.
That sounds like a poem. Is that a poem?
Yeah.
Sounds like a poem.
A season.
A book. A season and a punt.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I got some rhymes to work on. Yeah, I might do it in an Irish brogue. A season and a punt. Caleb Downs was back to receive. It was a thing ya wouldn't believe. Denzel Burke was being the jammer, and Caleb Downs would drop the hammer.
Oh,
let's go.
That was bad. That was bad.
All right, I know what I'm doing the rest of the day. I got 8 hours to work out like a 7,000 word rhyming poem.
My apologies to your family who's going to hear you talking in an Irish brogue for the rest of the day.
No, the thing is my family's leaving, so I'm going to be home alone for the next 5 days. So I'm talking all Irish till Thanksgiving.
Oh, man. Okay. Let's talk about Jim Knowles. I'll run through these and we'll end it with a question. Clayton said, I said several weeks back that Chip Kelly was a sick man for some of his play designs. Well, today, Jim Knowles was the sick one. Some of those blitzes were absolutely diabolical. And then Paul said, defense deserves all the praise in the world. It feels like Jim Knowles gets a feel on the first drive, dials things in, and then it's lights out for the rest of the game. I actually was looking up some stats on that I'll share. And then here's the last one from Eric. Jim Knowles' best game as a defensive coordinator at Ohio State. Is that a fact or an undisputed fact? I think it's a good question. Do you consider that Jim Knowles' best game as a coordinator here?
Man, I mean, it's so funny to think again, like we're hitting the reset button, but like how good we thought he was in 22 before the Michigan game, right? Like it was like, oh, this guy has been instantaneous. Like this guy, what a hire this was. And then they came out and over blitzed and missed a tackle, and Cornelius Johnson was off to the races, and we didn't think that anymore. Mm-hmm. So like spot performance, locked inness. Because this, again, I think it's because even like the fact that some of the vulnerabilities we thought maybe were there with the defense, it's like, did they solve the vulnerabilities at corner? It was like, well, they solved them by making them not an issue because they couldn't get the ball out, which is like what you do. You don't just like yell at your corners to play better. It's like, okay, we're going to make you look better. We're going to help you more because the rush and the coverage are always connected. So again, I'm obsessed with it. And I don't mean to keep repeating myself, except I've been repeating myself since we started podcast 9 years ago. The deep shot to Evan Stewart, where there were 4 Ohio State guys covering air in the middle of the field, like is burned into my brain as like, again, like that's almost a low point. And it's like, I get it. If it's just a call and that actually makes sense as a call and you thought they were going to run something, whatever. It was a waste. It was wasted players. And that's one of those where it's like, it doesn't matter how many 5-stars you have if your 5-stars are covering air and you're getting locked in a one-on-one matchup against another 5-star. It's like, okay, you want to count the 5-stars on the field? Maybe Ohio State has more. None of them are impacting this play. But the 5-star that transferred to Oregon, there's a ball dropping on his fingertips down the field, and that's what matters. And they don't do that anymore. They've started to compost. Do you compost? We compost. No waste in this house. No waste. The plastic goes in the recycling. The bananas go in the compost. Jim Knowles is the composter right now. There is no waste, and it's getting stinky for opposing offenses. You open that lid and you take a whiff of that thing the day before you put it on the curb. There might be bugs in there. You don't want to deal with that. That's this Ohio State defense. They're putting banana peels all over you, brother. Apple cores. The composter is here. And it took a while. When he got here, we thought he was good, but he was just putting all the trash in the same container. And it was like, okay, this is good, but it's like you gotta break it up. You've got to recycle, have your compost, and then maybe like the regular trash. And he's got 3 bags working now. He's not 1 bag in, he's 3 bags in. Oh, the composter. Like, I think it is. This is one of those, again, on a day where Kevin Wilson got fired today. Did you see that? Kevin Wilson got fired by Tulsa. It's the 6th American Conference coach to get fired this year. 2 of them are former Ohio State offensive coordinators. Tom Herman already got fired, and now Kevin Wilson got fired. It is a reminder that I'm never going to back down from my idea that, like, for the most part, assistant coaches at a place like Ohio State are middle managers, because there's a lot of guys out there who can look pretty good in the situations here if you have a good head coach and you have good players, because Tom Herman and Kevin Wilson like went out into the world and it's like they don't look like the guys who were dialing it up and doing a great job at Ohio State. So that's just the point of that. So I don't want to go too far, but then when you get the right guy, I don't know, give Jim Knowles $6 million a year. Like, this looks like the right guy. But it didn't happen instantaneously. And I think in year 3, if in year 1 we were maybe out a little bit ahead of it, right? It's like, boom, instant answer. This is the guy. The Michigan game is like, no, it's not. And then it's been like a reclamation project of different little paths. And now they're back on the road to a national championship. Like, it took a while to get here. But I have zero doubts now that he knows his players know him, and he knows what he needs to do. I think he is as locked in. Listen, there was some stuff like Chris Ash was doing in 14 that was like, man, Chris Ash got here from Arkansas and like made an instant impact, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like there were some things when Tom Herman brought some up-tempo stuff right away, and it was like, man, this is really good, right? So we've seen it. This is top shelf Ohio State assistant coaching right now, is it not? You're in on it. Come on, the composter. You would have told him that.
I like is it a t-shirt? Maybe it's a t-shirt. You can put it on a coffee mug, maybe. It just says 2024 Ohio State defense or 2024 silver bullets, there might be bugs in there. And then I'd wear that.
Yeah. But like you can see it. And it's not just because sometimes you can see the scheming, but better than the scheming is the connection, right?
Yeah, the connection. Yeah, it's actually I don't think we're going to talk to Jim Knowles this week. I think we're only talking to Ryan Day and the captains. But I thought you brought up a really good point about Jim Knowles and Cody Simon, where like in 2022, like Tommy Eichenberg was just an extension of Jim Knowles, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that is 100% where Cody Simon is now. But I don't think Cody Simon or Jim Knowles have really talked about that much yet. So like that is a fascinating development with this defense that I do think is helping tie a lot of this stuff together, because there is a precision with their blitzing now that I don't think we've seen since 2022, and I don't think it's a coincidence that like you had Tommy and now you have Cody like kind of doing the thing. I think both those guys were kind of the engines for that, and it takes everybody, right? It takes it takes Ty Hamilton like hammering a guard so that Cody Simon can time his blitz up right and get through that lane, or it takes Cody Simon running across the face of a center and taking him with him and opening up a straight line to Curtis Rourke that Jack Sawyer takes through Curtis Rourke, right? So like it's all working together, and they haven't even gotten into a lot of. They've done it some, but like there's more there with Lathan Ransom and Caleb Downs and Jordan Hancock too that I think we're going to keep seeing Jim Knowles layer onto these pressure packages. And I guess on one hand, there might be some concern with like, well, they have to do that because they're worried about their corners. It's hard for great corners to cover anybody for a long time if you're not getting pressure on the quarterback. Like it has to look this way. They have to hit quarterbacks. That was the biggest issue against Oregon's. Like Dylan Gabriel was far too comfortable. And I guess you could say like, well, Oregon's offensive line is better than Indiana's offensive line is. It's better than all the offensive lines it has played since Ohio State last played Oregon. And we'll see what this looks like if those two teams get on the field again. But man, like I just think they're in such a better place with what they're doing defensively. And some of it is Jim Knowles throwing it back to Oklahoma State or throwing it back to some of the pressure packages we saw from him in 2022. But I really mostly think it's just like players and coach being connected, and players being old and experienced and having gone through some stuff, and coordinator having gone through some stuff, and like using that in the right way and putting what we've seen on the field here the last few weeks. So I don't like have any concern that like this isn't real. I think I'm realistic in understanding that when Ohio State plays good offenses, sometimes they're going to do some stuff and the defense can't win every single snap. But if I had pretty strong reservations or concerns about Ohio State's ability defensively to make splash plays in big games, I don't know that I have them right now. I feel pretty good about where they're at.
And it's even one of those where like when you have a defense like Ohio State had where Chase Young is the driving engine of the defense in 2019, right? It's like, why are you guys so good at what you do? It's like, well, the number one reason is because nobody can block Chase Young. And sometimes he gets 4 sacks in a game. So then if you're going up against Texas in a playoff game and Texas has Kelvin Banks, who's a first-round left tackle, and it's like, okay, well, if Kelvin Banks can kind of cancel out Chase Young, then what? Like this is 11-man connection to a coordinator. This is not one guy acknowledging how great Caleb Downs is, for instance. So I almost feel better about like taking that out into the playoff, that it's not like, oh, here's somebody who can handle this matchup, because it's still not about Jack and JT just destroying tackles. That's not what they are. But it's about finding ways and like 11 good players. And I don't think there's a single thing, whether it's a really, and again, like the Oregon thing, like the Oregon tackles played well against Ohio State, right? But part of that was they weren't as connected, especially in their blitz packages in that game. And so then it's like, okay, well, Josh Connolly and our Johnny Cornelius had a good game, and Ohio State didn't get to Dylan Gabriel. Okay, that's not where this defense is right now. So it's not about individual matchups. It's about 11 on 11. It's about coordinator on coordinator. And I think you'd like Ohio State's chances against anybody.
I would. To the point of who said it? Paul said like there's some feeling out process that happens with Jim Knowles. I want to add all these up. On the first drive this year, Ohio State is giving up almost 5 yards per play. Akron drove it 47 yards and kicked the field goal. Marshall drove it 75 yards and scored a touchdown. Michigan State drove it 55 yards, turned it over on downs. Penn State drove it 61 yards, kicked the field goal. Northwestern drove it 59 yards and fumbled. Indiana drove it 70 yards and scored a touchdown. Funnily enough, like the rare instances of Ohio State like getting a team off the field on its opening drive, like one of them was the Oregon game when Oregon won 6 plays and punted. But Ohio State on the opening drive, as I said, is giving up. It's 4.7, so it's not quite 5. 4.7 yards per play. Every other play, it's like a full yard better. It's 3.7.
Oh wow!
Like that includes some of the garbage time drives against the backup defense where teams have found ways to move the ball too. So if I was enterprising enough to go through those drives and take them out of the equation, I bet what Ohio State's starting defense does is closer to like 3 yards per play on everything other than the opening drive. So so there is a feeling out process there. They've only given up 2 opening drive touchdowns to Marshall and Indiana. But teams have moved the ball on the opening drive, and I think it is. You have to give the other team credits, like they script their opening drives, right? Ohio State is not a script team, but a lot of teams are, and they're scripted for a reason, right? So, but once you get away from that, then it's Ohio State's time to take over, and they've done it basically in every game they've played so far this year.
Wow. Fancy stats, Landis. That's the good stuff, man. That's the good stuff. Yeah.
It's pretty crazy. Let's talk about Davis Igbinosun. A lot of text about Davison. Luke. So Davison Igbinosun got penalized 3 times in this game. He is, I was looking at PFF, so assuming those stats are reliable, he is the most penalized defensive player in college football. There are 2 offensive linemen at South Alabama who have been called for penalties 14 times, so they're the most penalized players in college football, but Davison Igbinosun is right behind them with 13 penalties called against him this year. Luke said, do you think the refs are aware of his aggression and keeping closer eyes on him, which is why he seems to have so many penalties? And then Will said, I don't understand the coaching around Davis and Igbinosun. Some of the pass interference penalties are not even close. He has hands draped all over the defender the entire route. This should be something that is fixable, and it's going to cost them in a big spot. And then there were a couple different versions of how close is Davis and Igbinosun to being like unplayable with the rate that he is racking up penalties.
It's hard because there was at least one, like, I don't know if it was a third down, but there's still times when it's like, it's like, especially on crossers sometimes where it's like, okay, he was all over that. They had no chance of completing that because Davis
Igbinosun on an in-breaking route. Yeah.
That he's just draped all over. He's so long. It's like the thing that's going to make NFL teams fall in love with him. I feel like his arms are so long, they're easier for the refs to see. But also, I don't know that people are like, I don't know if that was a penalty. It's like, no, that was a penalty.
Sometimes, yeah, some of them are quite obvious. I have found myself wondering if there's any element to this. Like, this will sound silly. Like when I was a kid playing basketball and I was 3 times the size of everyone on the floor, no one had no idea how to officiate me. And like that happens all the time with big men in basketball, right?
Yeah.
And I wonder if there's any element of that with Davis Igbinosun, who is, I think, significantly larger than your typical cornerback and longer, right? Like just like longer limbed than your typical cornerback. And it's like, well, it really looks like that corner's manhandling that guy. I guess I'll throw a flag. And it's just like, no, he's just bigger and stronger than him. Like, what's he supposed to do, right? It's not dissimilar from the Jeremiah Smith pass interference penalty against Oregon.
That's true.
Like, I don't think that was offensive pass interference. JJ's just really strong, and that guy was smaller than him. So I do think there is some element of that to this. It's not to excuse away all the penalties because he definitely gets pretty physical with guys and is deserving of flags in some instances. But I guess I say all that to say, like, I don't think he's unplayable. Because there's the other side of that coin where he makes the play on the in-breaking route that you're talking about, where he gets the interception in the end zone against Penn State. Like, you can't eliminate that from your defense. Might you rotate him more? Maybe. And I think they did that, right? I thought Jermaine Matthews played outside.
26.
Yeah.
Jermaine Matthews played 26 snaps. Davison Igbinosun played 47, and Denzel Burke played 55.
Yeah. So Jermaine was rotating in more for Davison than he was for Denzel. Yeah.
And there were 63, like Caleb Downs, Sonny Styles, and Cody Simon didn't come off the field. They played 63 snaps. So yeah, they played Jermaine Matthews, got like 3 or 4 series. So do you think that's part of the answer?
I think so. Yeah. I think it's just rotating. Teams are targeting Davison Igbinosun, like not for completions, but for penalties. And maybe there's some even teaching points you can give your receiver about like really trying to get into him and hope that the call goes your way, because more often than not it's going to. So Ohio State, I think, needs to be cognizant of that while it continues to work with Davison Igbinosun about trying to nip this issue in the bud a little bit. It's never going to go away. But 13 penalties is a lot. You like to see that maybe cut in half. So I think one way you could potentially cut that in half, or at least cut it down a little bit, is to rotate Jermaine Matthews in a little more. But the other part of that too is I think like Jermaine Matthews has probably earned it, right? We know he's ready to play. He should be playing. So why not put him out there?
It makes me want to look at all the drives on which Davison Igbinosun has gotten a penalty and see how many of those the opponents scored on. Because penalties matter, but it's like, what's the outcome? Is he getting 15-yard penalties that are setting teams up? That's a big chunk play. Okay, now all of a sudden they went from midfield to the 35, and that put them in field goal range, and here the offense is getting rolling, and the penalty was huge. Or is it like they're going, Ohio State's playing physical, they're getting after it. Oh, there was a 15-yard penalty, but now they're still playing physical and doing their thing, and there's a 3 that, then they just stop them on the next 3 downs and force to punt. And it's like, what's the cost? So 13's too many, but there's some of this, right? If you have a great pass rusher and he jumps off sides once or twice a game, it's like, I don't want to take that out of him. I don't want to have him not anticipating the snap and beating guys off the edge. Like, you take it, because there's an upside to it. There absolutely is an upside to Davison Igbinosun. You would just like to cut the downside. Maybe even cutting it in half is too much to ask, but by a third, he had 9 penalties instead of 13. Like, would that probably would feel a little bit better? Because I don't feel like, the thing about him is, I don't know that he's committing penalties because he's getting beat and then desperately grabbing guys. It feels more like, you're there, you're fine, you're there, stop grabbing, get your arms off that guy and just play the defense. But also, there's people watching this know we've been in a world where the number one thing that drove Ohio State fans crazy was corners who are there and get beat because they don't look for the ball. Or why aren't guys competing more at the catch point, right? Has that not been a thing that we've been talking about for 6 years with Ohio State? Why are their corners right there getting mossed? And it's like, well, Davison Igbinosun doesn't get mossed because he rips the guy's arms off before they have a chance to do that. So what do you want? So I'd rather have the physical guy who's not giving up the catches, but just like 30% less physical. So maybe I'll look that up. Like, what is the cost of the Davison Igbinosun penalties? But you don't, like, it's not, if the question is unplayable, no, you need him. I still want him out there. There's especially certain situations where, like, I want that guy on the field, because I just think he's going to make it tough. He's going to make it tough on the defense, on the offense, to try to get something done. So, but I do think, can I call you cheesesteak Shack? Just like dominating like Philly Catholic League 11-year-old basketball, and being like, I had 16 points and 14 rebounds today, but it was only in 8 minutes because I fouled out in the first half. And it's like, they don't know what to do with Bill Landis. I feel like this would be one of those, next time Davison Igbinosun comes out, like, you could walk with him and be like, I know what it's like, brother. Let me tell you.
I do. You know where it showed up for me is more than basketball was in hockey. I was the most penalized player in the league for like 3 years in a row in hockey.
Were you a defenseman?
Mostly. I started off as a left winger and then moved back to defense. And then I would just pummel people in the corners. I'm not saying I didn't deserve it.
Yeah, that sounds deserved. I'm not, oh, sorry. I just started skating so fast and drove that guy through the boards. It was an accident.
It was an accident. Sorry. I don't know how to stop. That was
Yeah.
actually a problem. I didn't know how to stop, so that was I needed to use somebody to help me stop. Yeah,
You used other preteens' bodies to stop you.
yes, I did.
Sorry, man.
Sorry, my bad. All right, let's end with a quick Will Howard thing because I feel like we need to talk about him every week. Will got people pretty fired up, I think, with how he was talking about the Michigan game, and what it means to Ohio State, what it means to the guys who came back for this team, and how badly he wants to win that game for them next week. And there's always like the Will Howard like hyper examination coming off of every game. Thomas, I thought, summed it up nicely. He said, "You can call Will Howard many things. My choice is, quote, what this team needs." I think that's right. I think that's probably true of what Will Howard is and has been for Ohio State. But there are also people wondering if it can be more than that. This is from Austin. He liked Will Howard doing the stomp out the cigarette move to Kurt Signetti. I think a lot of people like that too. Austin said that's the energy this team needs. Will's a great leader and a great player, and he needs more Heisman Trophy love, which again, we talked about this briefly on KOTN on Saturday night. We think he's kind of right there, right? If he plays well the next 2 weeks, he could be not to win it, because I don't know that anybody can kind of enter that conversation necessarily with Travis Hunter and Ashton Genty from Boise State, but other guys need to go to New York, and I think you and I agree that Will Howard is perhaps well positioned to be one of those guys if he keeps playing the way he's been playing the next 2 weeks.
Quite the lurker. He's in the lurker spot. 4 guys go to New York, and we think 2 spots are locked up. Is that fair with Travis Hunter and Ashton Genty?
Yes.
So then who else? So right now, Cam Ward gets a lot of discussion, the Miami quarterback. I don't know. Whatever. There probably needs to be somebody from the bottom half of the country. Dillon Gabriel is certainly in the driver's seat. As we always say, the easiest Heisman candidacy is the quarterback of the best team. But I said to you, if Ohio State beats Michigan and it's Ohio State, Oregon in the Big Ten title game, is it just like the quarterback of the winning team is winning votes there, right? I just think there's a lot of people at this point who the top 2 spots on their ballot are going to be Hunter and Genty. And then, so now it's like because there's only 3 spots on your Heisman ballot, who's getting those 3rd place votes to get to New York, which is quite an experience. Travis Hunter's going to win. He's minus 800. That's going to be a big time game. It matters like whether Miami is in the ACC championship game. And as I read it, so SMU has clinched a spot in the ACC championship game. Clemson is done with its ACC schedule because it plays South Carolina this week. Clemson's in at 7-1. Miami is 6-1 and playing Syracuse. And if Miami wins and they are also 7-1, they have the tiebreaker over Clemson. So if Miami beats Syracuse, it's going to be Miami SMU. If Syracuse beats Miami, it'll be Clemson SMU. That would hurt Cam Ward's Heisman chances to not be in championship game weekend. So Kyle McCord has a chance to help Will Howard get to New York. Bill.
Love it. I hadn't thought of that, but I think you're right. Cam Ward leads the country in passing touchdowns with 34. He's also thrown the ball 11 more times per game than Will Howard has. Will Howard is 2nd in the country in passer rating behind Jackson Dart, who just lost his 3rd game yesterday, so he's not going to go to New York. Will Howard, it's funny, there's been an ongoing conversation about Will Howard and Dillon Gabriel and why Dillon Gabriel feels like such I don't know. He is practically guaranteed to be a Heisman Trophy finalist when his stats and Will Howard's stats are very similar. And part of the thing with Dillon Gabriel has been just like how efficient he is and how high his completion percentage is. Will Howard currently leads the country in completion percentage at 74. He is, and Dillon Gabriel 2nd at 73.
Does Dillon Gabriel have more picks than Will Howard?
They have the same. Will Howard 74%. 26 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. Dillon Gabriel, 73.8%, 22 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. They have the same number of interceptions. Will Howard has 4 more touchdowns. Dillon Gabriel has more yards. He also throws the ball more than Will Howard does. He's right there. I think if Ohio State wins the Big Ten, Will Howard's probably going to go to New York.
So I think it might be there's 5 guys for 4 spots, and actually there's 3 guys for 2 spots because Hunter and Genty are in, and then I think it might be Cam Ward, Dylan Gabriel, and Will Howard for the other 2 spots. Because Georgia has locked up an SEC championship game spot, they don't have a Heisman candidate. Carson Beck blows, and they're going to play either Texas or Texas A&M. Texas A&M doesn't have a guy, and Quinn Ewers got benched this year, so I don't think Texas or Texas A&M. I don't think there's going to be a Heisman candidate. Carson Beck's plus 250 for people in the South who are blind and have amnesia and they want to vote for Carson Beck. I don't think the SEC has a Heisman candidate. And the only Heisman candidate in the ACC is Cam Ward. And the Big 12, like if BYU had kept it going, I thought Jake Retzlaff for the BYU as a BYU quarterback had a chance. But like BYU has not been that team the past couple of weeks. Shadur Sanders to send 2 guys to New York for Colorado. He was kind of a little loose with some stuff. He's an excellent quarterback. I just don't think like Ohio State's had multiple guys to New York before. So like, it's not impossible. That's not my prediction that Colorado gets 2 guys to New York. And now you're just looking around and it's like, who else is there? So I think it's Ward, Gabriel, and Howard. And I said to you, right, if it's Ohio State, Oregon, the winning quarterback goes to New York. And you said, why not both? And I think you're right.
Yeah, it would take. I think it would take Miami losing to Syracuse for that to be a reality. But I also think that is a reality that could happen. So yeah. I guess if you're someone who wants to see Will go to New York, then you're rooting for Kyle McCord to help Syracuse beat Miami this week. That would help things tremendously. I don't know, and that's not the only path for Will, because if he goes to Indianapolis and outduels Dylan Gabriel, I think that would get him there too. Part of this too is like what Ohio State chooses to do in promoting that. Ohio State just never been big about promoting guys for the Heisman, and I know there's some frustrations with that, and I actually don't even think they're that far off base.
Well, here's the thing. You can't promote somebody for the Heisman for Ohio State if they don't beat Michigan.
That's what I was going to say. So I think if Will plays well in an Ohio State win against Michigan, you will see the campaign begin.
Yeah. I mean, like I went in and sat down with CJ a couple years ago, like a couple weeks before the Michigan game, as like part of a, hey, why don't you come talk to CJ? And then like maybe this could be a story that could drop like after the Michigan game when it's Heisman talk time. And like that's the conversation we had. And then it was Ohio State lost to Michigan. Like that would make Ohio State fans more angry. It's like coming on the heels of a loss to Michigan, the Heisman campaign of the Ohio State quarterback. Nobody wants to see that. Like that's not the reality. CJ was positioned 2 straight years to win the Heisman if they had beaten Michigan. He was the odds-on favorite in 21 after he threw 6 touchdown passes in the first half against Michigan State. All they had to do was go beat Michigan and then get in the Big Ten championship game and have him be a reasonable facsimile of himself. I think he would have run away with it. And it didn't happen. And then in 22, like it's the same deal kind of. And then frankly, like show me a through the roof Marv game against Michigan last year where Ohio State wins and like take your chances, right? And then have him go to the Big Ten championship game and do his thing. So I think like the idea that Ohio State hasn't promoted it, Ohio State like can't, like that's not what it's about. And so, but if they do what they need to do on the field, which is the number one thing this team needs to do, which is go beat its rival, then it's on. So, and also like, it's not like people don't know who the Ohio State quarterback is. So I've seen people be angry about like, why are they doing this? Why is this guy this? And it's like, it's just a different animal. People are aware of who the Ohio State quarterback is, right? But you have to do the thing you have to do or you're not going to win it. And by the way, like the idea that Ohio State hasn't, they've had like 6 Heisman candidates in 5 years get to New York. Like nobody's been to New York more than Ohio State. CJ went twice. Justin was there. They had a year where they had 3 guys in the top 6 in 2019. Like the idea that Ohio State's been underrepresented in the Heisman race is just like Justin was in the driver's seat in 2020 in a lot of ways. And they had a bad game against Indiana and they didn't play enough games because of COVID. So that hurt him. So I don't think the idea that Ohio State doesn't promote their guys, I think is not true. But Will Howard's, if he's not in the Big Ten championship game and he doesn't beat Michigan, then like this isn't a conversation anymore. Sure. But if they do, absolutely primed to get to New York, and then I do believe they will push it. I do believe they will.
I think they will. But I also think I I think it would need to be pushed in this particular case, only because Will Howard has played a lot of football at Kansas State, and there are preconceived notions about him that I don't think people have fully gotten over or want to admit that he's a much better player now at Ohio State than he was at Kansas State. So I do, there's a perception battle that I think Will Howard needs to overcome a little bit. It's not as obvious and in your face as CJ Stroud throwing 40 touchdown passes or Dwayne Haskins throwing 40 touchdown passes, right? So, and I don't say that to say like I think Will's been excellent, and I think he would absolutely be deserving of it if he does what we think he might do the next 2 weeks. So, but I do think this particular conversation is different than previous Ohio State quarterbacks.
But I do think, again, it's not a race, and so like you there's some of this that you have to let unfold. But like, whatever. 2 years ago, the TCU quarterback finished second in the Heisman race, and nobody knew who he was. And it's like, why did he do that? It's like, and they actually lost their conference championship game
to Will Howard.
But to Will Howard. So maybe we can have a Max Duggan testimonial on behalf of Will Howard. But you're the quarterback for a playoff team. Like, that is a quarterback for a conference champ in a situation where the SEC quarterback is not going to be is not a better candidate than you, at the very least, is not a better candidate to you. But then again, like, nobody's beaten Travis Hunter. So like, I'm not saying it doesn't matter, because getting to New York, I think, is quite an experience and quite an honor. And it absolutely matters. So I'm not underselling that at all. Travis Hunter has it locked up.
Yeah, it seems like it. Yeah.
I think Travis Hunter could not play, like, not sit out, because then like people would be mad. But like, if he stepped off a curb and broke his ankle, no. If he stepped off a curb and was abducted by aliens on Tuesday and didn't play the rest of the year, he'd win it.
I think that's probably right. Yeah. Although we've seen quarterbacks make really late surges. I think in years where there hasn't been an obvious guy like a Travis Hunter, but like Bryce Young, like I remember a couple of years ago,
sure.
Like, oh, he played well in the SEC title game. I guess he's the Heisman Trophy winner, right? So that's out there too. I think I don't want to be dismissive
absolutely
of that.
No, absolutely. And so it really matters. But again, like, this, like, for like his actual, like, whatever, his Heisman moment, the first step was Saturday, beat Indiana in a top 5 game. That was the first step. And the other thing too is like, and this is just reality, is like the most famous thing he's done so far, which is why you're probably right, there needs to be a little push. The most famous thing he's done so far is slide down a second late.
Yeah.
Now, is that fair? Is that representative of what he's meant to this team and how well he's played? No. And it wasn't like a colossal bonehead mistake. It was like a guy trying to make a read and do the right thing, and he was a second late. So, but that's the number one thing on his highlight resume so far this year. So that is something like to get past. So, and it wouldn't be bad for him to, like, I don't know, break 6 tackles and have a 45-yard touchdown run against Michigan.
I am waiting for that. That's like, I every week I'm like, this is the week that Will Howard's going to run more, and it's like, well, I guess not. So I guess that is still out there for him, which would obviously help his chances if it were to come. So, all right, that's everything.
Can I just give one stat real quick? The running backs so far, Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson so far this year combined averaged 21 carries per game for 135 yards, and just to note that they have not quite been the maybe 2,000-yard backs by the end of the regular season, greatest rushing attack in the country. They've maybe not quite been that. It has been everything Ohio State's wanted. The fact that they have 2 healthy, fresh-looking, like they look like they're ready to run a marathon, right? I don't. It's a lot. Like, football's a violent sport, and I'm sure they have some dings and that kind of thing. Don't they look like they just came out from August camp and are ready to go? Like, they are primed for this run, and that this is such a good example of what 2 great backs sharing the load, being so important to the offense, making blocks, running through tackles, getting yards on their own, and looking absolutely ready for the stretch run. This is as good as it looks, I think.
Yeah, I think I would agree with most of that. There was, I definitely agree with that about Travion. There's been, I think, some concern, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't have some, about Quinshon at times, I think, not seeing it great. Maybe he's leaving some yards there because he's being a little too eager to hit a hole. I'm willing to chalk some of that up to the offensive line shuffle. Like things might happen differently, happen at a different speed or whatever when you're moving guys around up front. I think Quinshon's been good all year. Like I'm not trying to say he's been bad. I think there's another level I think for him to get to or even like get back to, because there were times early in the year where I definitely thought he was in that form. So I don't have much to nitpick there, but that is one thing that's on my mind is like, can they get? I think Travion's playing the best football of his career. I don't know. Granted, I haven't watched every snap of Quinshon Judkins' career, but I don't know that you would say that necessarily about Quinshon Judkins. But if you can get both guys doing that, then like, yeah, then it's on. And but I think the most important thing to your point is like Ohio State wanted to have both these guys to share the load to get them to this point where they're both available and ready to roll. And I think that's where Ohio State is.
Yeah. Also, can we talk about very quickly the thing that if it had not gone well would been the first thing we talked about? Instead, we haven't talked about it at all, and that's Austin Sarabeld and Carson Hinsman just kind of doing their thing for the most part.
Yeah, I think like maybe the thing that underscores that the most is like we didn't get a lot of questions about it.
Yeah,
like there were more questions about Tegra Shabola than there were about Austin Sarabeld and Carson Hinsman. I don't know that there were any about Carson Hinsman and Austin Sarabeld. So
pressures by PFF, pressures allowed Donovan Jackson 2, Austin Sarabeld and Carson Hinsman 1 each. They don't have any for Tegra, but Tegra had like a rough play or two. None for Josh Fryer. Like again, Mikal Kamara is like a really good edge guy, and just certainly was not blowing up the passing game in any way. And I just like this, we sort of said like we were not as concerned about this on Wednesday as the left tackle injury to Josh Simmons, and I think that proved itself out. That people were panicking.
Yeah.
Like Ohio State fans were panicking, and then like these guys handled their business for the most part. I thought there was one. I thought they allowed some pressure on Will Howard that forced him to step up, and I don't know, force the throw, but like he did have to step up away from interior pressure on the pick to Jelani Thurman, and I thought that was the one time when it was like, okay, maybe if they had held up a little bit there, maybe that wouldn't have happened. But that was it. To me, that was the one time that I noticed maybe Sarabeld and Hinsman not having a great rep. Otherwise, business handling across the board.
Yeah, I thought the pass protection was pretty good for the most part. Will Howard ended up getting pressured on 32% of his dropbacks, 9 out of 19, according to PFF. I think you take that given the situation you were in. And there was some stuff in the run game for sure. But I also think part of that was just like numbers stuff too, not necessarily like losing one-on-ones all the time. So I'll say the same thing I said after the Penn State game. Like, it's good enough, right? When you're making all these changes and you're moving guys around, I think in game one, all you can hope for is that it's good enough and then you build from there. And I think that's definitely what this was.
And Mason Graham's coming.
And here come Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant and Josiah Stewart and Derek Moore. It's a very good defensive line.
Yeah. So, but again, I don't think, I mean, if you're trying to go to where does somebody have an edge or whatever, right? That's probably where you would go if Michigan has an edge in this game. It's with their defensive line against the Ohio State offensive line, but I don't think it is like a panic situation edge for Ohio State at this point, right? So
I'm not panicking. No, it's just it's a spot that you're going to look at to try to see what a pathway for Michigan. What's Ohio State? A 24-point favorite or something? Like what's the pathway for Michigan to make that closer than that? And it starts with its defensive line.
Yeah. So, but we have we'll get into all of that more on we're going to put it up on Wednesday. So we're a little bit of obviously a little bit of a change to the week for everybody with Thanksgiving, but Kings of Columbus will probably be on YouTube and in the podcast feeds on Wednesday. Is that what we anticipate?
It will. It's just a matter of I don't know yet whether it's going to be early Wednesday morning or maybe like Wednesday afternoon, but it'll be up for sure sometime on Wednesday.
Okay. I'm looking at the line. I think maybe it's moved a little bit already.
20 and a half.
20 and a half. But I do think it was up at 23 or 23 and a half, maybe.
I think it was that last
week ago. Yeah.
Before, it might have been even before the Seth McLaughlin injury and also before Michigan put up 50 on Northwestern. So like I get that line moving. That line should move when Ohio State loses Seth McLaughlin with how good that defensive line is, but it's still 20 and a half.
And against an overmatched opponent, Michigan at least like had a pulse on offense, which has not always been the case this year. So, yeah, we get it. Okay. All right, that's it for this edition of Kings of Columbus. Thanks as always to you guys for participating. We love your comments. We love your questions. We are especially excited that the Ohio State fan base had an excellent day in the Horseshoe and sitting in their living rooms watching on TV with family and friends, because sports should make you happy. And if you are an Ohio State fan, I think your team should be making you happy right now. So it's Michigan week. It's Thanksgiving week. For a lot of people, that's the best week of the year. Do we want to tell people what we're might be doing with the texters a little bit?
Yeah, I think it would help
Wednesday
to frame their mind. Yeah.
So can you remind people of the quote that Jack Sawyer had after the game on Saturday about Michigan?
Yeah, he was asked about, how quickly his mind goes now to playing Michigan, and he said sort of like right away, this is what we came back for. These guys, I'm paraphrasing, but he said something to the effect of like, these guys have ruined our lives for the last 3 years.
Yeah. So we think for our Kings of Columbus show this week, we're going to give you ball breakdown, but also, your team by now. And Michigan is still primarily non-functional on one side of the ball. So like, hey, I don't know, Michigan can't throw. Like, I don't know, we need to do half an hour on that kind of thing. So we'll talk about the Michigan defensive line, and Will Johnson's not going to play the rest of the year, and like, but what do they have in the secondary, all that kind of stuff. We need to talk ball. Nobody is making assumptions about anything. You making any assumptions about this game, Landis? Like, Michigan stink. We're doing that? Nope. I don't think we're doing that. We're breaking down a ball game for the Ohio State playing the defending national champs. And they still have a lot of players on that team who know how to win. And so we're going to break down the ball, but I think we're going to do some version of your reaction to the Jack Sawyer quote. What have the last 3 years, the last 3 Michigan games done to your life? / what are you thankful for as an Ohio State fan? So that is like the two ends of the spectrum. They ruined my life, but I'm thankful for this. So we want to have some breakdown and some feelings. And I think that'll be maybe a 50-50 split on Kings of Columbus. Is that all right?
That's the plan. Sounds great.
Yeah. Fancy Stats. Cheesecake Shack says it's okay. That will be the plan. And so we will see you guys on Wednesday. And of course, all through the week here on the podcast with Austin and Berm and Zach Boren and everybody else talking Ohio State, Michigan. It's a great time of the year for college football fans, and Ohio State fans should be feeling good about it. All right. Thanks to you guys for being here. He's Bill Landis. I'm Doug Lesmerises, and that was Kings of Columbus.